Alright, so exercise number 8 here is asking us to write a fruitful function called pickActivity. Now remember, fruitful means that it is a function that returns a value. So it's asking us to write a function that returns a value called pickActivity that's going to pick an activity based on the weather. It's going to take two parameters. Let's just start by writing this out as we read this here. So we're going to define the function pickActivity. It's going to take two parameters. The first parameter is how hot it is. So I'm going to call that temperature or temp. And the second one is for how wet it is. So let's call that, I can't really think of a good variable name for that. Let's call it weather or something like that. Though, I guess heat. Let's call it temp and humid. So temperature and humidity. All right. So it's going to take those. Those will be strings, but we can do equality statements for string. So if I printed this out, does the string equal string? It would return true. If I tested the string equals strings, it would return false. So we can test equality on strings exactly the same way that we do with integers. So it's going to take those two things, and it's going to test for it. It wants us to use the elif construct, and it wants us to do it and have these parameters up here, or these return values up here. If it's hot and wet, watch Netflix. Hot and dry, go swimming. Cold and wet, paint. Cold and dry, cafe. So let's make those happen. So we'll just go straight down from the top. So if temp equals hot. So let me do this a couple ways really quick, and I'll show you the way that I'll show you a couple ways to do it. So if temp equals hot and make sure that when you're testing this that you make sure to put these into strings. So if temp equals hot and humid equals, was the first one, wet, return, go watch Netflix. Else, if temp equals hot and humid equals dry, return, what is it, go swimming. Else if temp equals cold and humid equals wet, return paint a picture. And finally, we can just do else here, obviously, but we'll still do elif. Elif temp equals what is this? Cold and humid equals dry. Return. Go to a cafe and read. Okay, so we have these four cases here. And the problem here is that we should really be testing to see whether or not, if this was production code, if we were doing this code for an actual project, we would want to make sure that the input to this function actually is correct, is either hot or wet or cold or dry, one of those four things. It should either be hot or wet for temp and cold or wet or dry for humidity. So we would want to test for those things to make sure that just those are the actual entries that the user gave. But we'll assume for the sake of this exercise that the user provides correct input. So we don't need to even have an else in here for our else statement. We can just have these four because if the user is using our function correctly, it will return one of these things. So that'll work. So we can, down here, we'll make a main function, and in there we'll print some results, right? We'll print the value of pick. We'll just go ahead and do all of them, right? So pick activity, and we'll do hot. Whoops, sorry, make sure you pass in strings, otherwise it will not work. So pick activity, hot and wet. So hot and dry, and cold and wet, and whoops, cold and dry. Okay. And then down at the bottom, make sure that you either use that magic statement that goes like if name equals what is it, main, it's something like this, but I don't really have it memorized off the top of my head, so I'm just going to call main directly down here. Make sure you use one of those two things, and then we can see here that it works. All four of these things get printed. So let me show you the way that, generally speaking, I would do this. I would set it up, and I'll just comment all of this out. Here, let me do that, and then that. There's a way to get multi-line comments like this. Okay, well, whatever. I'll just do comment straight across. Sorry, comment. Okay. So instead, what we'll do is this. If the temperature is hot, then check after we check whether the temperature is hot. If it is hot, then check whether humid is wet. So if it's hot and wet, then we want to return go watch Netflix. Else return go swimming. So this is the first result here. So let me walk you through my logic. So if the temperature is hot, then it's either going to be Netflix or swimming. Those are our only two options. If it's hot, it's either going to be Netflix or swimming. So if it's hot and wet, it's Netflix. If it's anything else, it's go swimming. So if it's hot and it's wet, we're going to watch Netflix. But if it's hot and not wet, we're going to go swimming. So we can do the same thing down below for this, and we'll still do elif. Elif temp equals cold if humid equals wet. Return paint a picture. Else return go to a cafe and read. So generally speaking, this tends to be how I think of this kind of branched logic. Just this is what seems more natural to me, though both implementations here, this one up here that we commented out and this one down below, are equally valid. They're equally right. They function exactly the same. But this, I think, makes more sense to me as a logical flow. It checks whether it's hot and whether it's wet, and then go swimming. I just think it works better. I don't know. I like this better than this. But it is, I think, a matter of opinion in this case.